You've got the job, you've got the apartment, you've got the followers. You're doing everything right. And yet you feel hollow. You laugh with your friends, but it feels like acting. You hit new milestones, but the joy fades almost instantly. You check your phone, hoping to feel something, but all you get is a dull echo. You lie in bed, scrolling, wondering why none of it feels real. Why does it feel like something is missing when on paper, everything looks perfect?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
That's the question no one wants to ask out loud. Because once you ask it, you're no longer playing the game. You're no longer hypnotized by the chase. You're waking up, and that, right there, is terrifying. Because it means the ladder you've been climbing might be leaning against the wrong wall. And now you're asking what's at the top of it, and more importantly, what's underneath it. You see, we live in a world built to distract us from ourselves. Every ad, every notification, every metric is designed to keep you chasing something just out of reach. More money, more likes, more validation. But here's the part no one tells you. Even when you get it, it doesn't last. The applause fades, the dopamine crashes, and you're left with the same haunting silence you were trying to escape. That silence is not the problem. It's the truth. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called it the sickness unto death, a slow spiritual decay, not caused by pain, but by meaninglessness. When you're physically sick, you notice, you slow down. But when your soul is sick, you keep going. You keep performing. You smile while dying inside. And the worst part? No one notices. Because they're busy doing the same thing. So why do we feel empty when everything seems fine? Because we've confused stimulation for fulfillment. We've mistaken distraction for connection. We've traded depth for dopamine, and the price is our humanity. We scroll past sunsets. We ghost people who care about us. We chase goals we don't even believe in, and then we wonder why we feel numb. Let's go deeper. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're waking up in a system that profits from your disconnection. The emptiness you feel is not a flaw, it's a message. It's your inner being screaming for something real, something raw, something human. But we've been taught to silence that voice with productivity, with entertainment, or with status. But the voice doesn't go away. It just gets quieter, until one day you forget it was ever there. This is where philosophy becomes medicine. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But most of us don't have a why, we have a to-do list. We have a brand. We have goals that were handed to us by society, not chosen from within. And that's why we feel so lost, because we're living for things we don't really care about. Here's the paradox. You can be successful and still be starving. Starving for meaning. Starving for connection. Starving for presence. And the world will never tell you that. Because as long as you keep chasing, you're profitable. But the moment you stop and say, "Wait, what am I even doing this for?" the system loses control over you. So let me ask you the question most people avoid. What are you pretending to care about? Is it the job? The image? The lifestyle? What would happen if you stopped pretending? what would fall apart, and what would finally begin. Most people are afraid of emptiness, so they fill it with noise. But the masters, the philosophers, the mystics, the seekers, they go straight into it. They sit in the silence. They confront the void. And in doing so, they find something the world can't offer: truth, inner truth. The kind that doesn't depend on applause or achievement. The kind that holds you even when everything else falls away. But that journey starts with honesty, radical honesty. You have to look at your life and ask, am I truly alive or just performing aliveness? Am I truly fulfilled or just checking boxes? Am I surrounding myself with people who see me or just mirrors that reflect who I'm trying to be? This is not about giving everything up. It's about waking up. It's about remembering that the soul doesn't speak in numbers. It speaks in moments, in silence, in awe, in pain, in connection. And most of us haven't listened to it in years. We've drowned it out with goals and grind, but it's still there, waiting. Let's go even deeper. Emptiness isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's a space, a sacred space, a clearing. The Buddhists call it shunyata, the fertile void, the place where ego dissolves and presence begins, the place where you're no longer chasing, no longer resisting, just being. But we're so addicted to stimulation that we run from that space. We think emptiness means something's wrong, but maybe it means something's finally right. Think of the moments you felt most alive. Were they filled with noise or with presence? Were they about achievement or about connection? About proving yourself or losing yourself? The soul doesn't want more. It wants real love, real meaning, real silence, real being. And in a world of endless performance, that's the most revolutionary thing you can choose. But choosing it requires courage, because it means slowing down. It means feeling what you've been avoiding. It means letting go of the masks, the roles, the hype. And that's terrifying. Because who are you without all that? Who are you when there's nothing left to prove? That question is the gateway. It's the start of everything real. And it's where most people turn back. They reach the edge of awakening and retreat, because comfort is easier than truth. But if you're still watching this, it means you're ready to stop running, ready to stop pretending, you're ready to feel again, even if it hurts. Because the truth is, the emptiness you feel is sacred. It's not a void to be filled. It's a signal, a lighthouse, a doorway. It's telling you you were made for something deeper. And no amount of success or stimulation will ever fill that space. Because that space belongs to something eternal. What is it? That's what you're here to find out. Let's continue. You're here because part of you knows that the emptiness isn't random. It's not a glitch in the system. It is the system. A system that has traded meaning for metrics. That's taught you to worship what's visible and ignore what's vital. You were never taught to nourish the soul. You were taught to build a brand, chase credentials, check boxes, and smile for the camera. And now, in the quiet moments, the ones you can't filter or monetize, you feel a kind of ache you can't explain. That ache is your truth trying to surface. But truth doesn't scream. It whispers. And in a world that's constantly screaming at you to do more, be more, buy more, it's easy to miss. Or worse, to mistake that whisper for weakness. So we cover it up with busyness, with entertainment, with another project, another scroll, another distraction. But the whisper never leaves, because it's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to wake you up. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And that's exactly what we've done. We've created lives that look perfect from the outside, curated, polished, impressive, but inside, we're starving. Not because we're lazy or broken, but because we've been trained to ignore the very parts of us that make life worth living. The parts that crave depth, stillness, intimacy, truth. We don't suffer because we lack things. We suffer because we lack meaning. And meaning doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from what you align with, from what you're willing to give your attention, your energy, your life to. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." That's what most of us are doing, distracting ourselves to death. But here's the part that hurts the most. Even the pleasure doesn't work anymore. The highs are shorter. The dopamine fades faster. The applause doesn't land. The vacation doesn't fix it. And so we start to ask dangerous questions. Questions like, is this all there is? Why am I even doing this? What if I've been chasing the wrong things my whole life? And those questions aren't the beginning of the end. They're the beginning of truth. See, emptiness isn't the enemy. It's the invitation. It's the silence you need to hear the real questions. Not the ones the world gives you. How much do you make? What's your 5-year plan? How many followers do you have? But the ones your soul is dying to ask, what do I actually care about? Who am I without all this noise? What would I do if no one was watching? These are dangerous questions, not because they're wrong, but because they're real. They threaten the entire performance. They pull you out of the simulation. And that's scary, because it means you might have to let go of things you spent years building. But here's the paradox. What you lose in ego, you gain in freedom. What you release in status, you reclaim in self. We all carry a silent fear that if we stop performing, we'll disappear. That without the achievements, we'll be invisible. That if we stop being impressive, we'll stop being loved. But love built on performance isn't love. It's a transaction. And you weren't made to be a transaction. You were made to be seen, not for what you do, but for who you are. So let me ask you, when was the last time you were truly seen? Not liked, not admired, seen. When was the last time you let someone hold your truth without editing it? When was the last time you stopped pretending, even for a second? If you can't remember, that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility now. The deeper truth is this: we feel empty because we've abandoned ourselves. We've outsourced our self-worth to strangers on the internet. We've built castles out of validation, only to find they collapse in silence. We've become experts at looking happy and amateurs at being real. And the cost is our wholeness. But it doesn't have to stay that way. The path back is not easy, but it's available. And it starts with one radical act: stillness. Not meditation for productivity, not journaling to optimize your week, just stillness. As in, stop, sit, breathe, feel. Let the noise settle. Let the masks fall. Let whatever's underneath rise to the surface. And don't judge it, just witness it. You might feel pain, loneliness, anger, regret. That's okay. That's not failure, it's healing. You've been running from these feelings for years. Now you're finally facing them. And in doing so, you're reclaiming your power. Because the part of you that feels empty isn't weak. It's the part of you that remembers. It remembers what it's like to be whole. It remembers what it's like to be real. And when you stop running, something shifts. The emptiness starts to feel different, less like a void and more like a clearing. A space where something new can grow, something authentic, something that doesn't need to be posted or monetized or explained, just lived, fully, deeply, presently. This is where philosophy meets psychology, where meaning meets healing, where knowledge meets soul. The Stoics taught us to focus only on what we can control. But they also taught us to live in alignment with nature, our nature. And you can't live in alignment if you don't even know who you are beneath the noise. So we start stripping back, layer by layer, roll by roll, image by image, until you meet yourself again. The self that existed before the world told you who to be. The self that doesn't care about followers or job titles. The self that only wants realness, stillness, connection, truth. That's the self the emptiness is trying to lead you back to. But the journey isn't linear. Some days you'll feel clear. Other days you'll feel lost. Sometimes you'll want to go back to the noise, the chase, the performance. That's okay. Just don't stay there. Remember what you've seen. Remember what you felt. Remember that the emptiness isn't a dead end, it's a doorway. If you've come this far, it means something in you is no longer willing to settle for a life that looks good but feels hollow. You've started to remember that your soul wasn't made for endless performance. It was made for presence, for truth, for meaning. And the emptiness you feel, even though it terrifies you, is actually your greatest ally, because it refuses to let you keep sleepwalking through a life that doesn't belong to you. We were not meant to live in a constant state of stimulation. Our nervous systems weren't designed to process hundreds of messages, likes, and comparisons every day. But we've normalized it. We've mistaken numbness for peace. We confuse distraction with relief. And over time, this constant rush of surface-level emotion leaves us profoundly disconnected from what's real. That's the origin of the emptiness, not a lack of success, but a lack of self. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." That quote hits hard, doesn't it? Because we avoid that quiet. We avoid the stillness that would force us to face who we've become. And yet, it's only in that stillness that we can begin to reconnect with what truly matters. It's where we stop chasing and start listening to ourselves, to life, to something deeper than the surface. When you truly listen, you'll begin to notice how much of your life has been shaped by fear of missing out, fear of not being enough, fear of being forgotten. But fear makes a terrible compass. It leads you in circles. It keeps you busy, but never fulfilled. And the irony is that the more you try to escape the emptiness, the deeper it becomes. Because you're feeding the very illusion that caused it in the first place. That's why real healing begins with honesty. Not surface-level honesty, but soul-level honesty. The kind where you finally admit, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who I am beneath all these roles. And I'm tired of pretending I'm fine. That's not weakness. That's awakening. That's the very moment your life begins to shift, not because you've figured everything out, but because you've stopped lying to yourself. And once you see that clearly, you can begin to build something real. Not a life based on performance, but one based on presence. You begin to make different choices. You choose conversations that nourish you, not ones that impress. You pursue goals that align with your values, not ones that boost your ego. You slow down, not because you're lazy, but because you're finally respecting your inner rhythm. This is where psychology meets spiritual maturity. You learn to feel your feelings without being controlled by them. You learn to sit with discomfort without needing to escape. And slowly, the emptiness begins to shift. It begins to feel less like a void and more like a threshold, a place of potential, a place where you meet the real you, the one that's been waiting all along. But this path isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, because it requires dismantling the identity you've built to survive. It requires facing the fact that some of the things that once gave you comfort, validation, approval, status no longer satisfy you. And that means grieving. Grieving the illusions. Grieving the wasted time. Grieving the version of yourself that you now realize was never truly alive. Yet in that grief, something beautiful happens. You begin to soften. You begin to open. You begin to see others not as competitors or followers, but as fellow travelers. You begin to speak from the heart. You begin to connect in ways that aren't performative. And for the first time in a long time, you feel human again. You begin to understand that the point of life isn't to be impressive, it's to be real. You live in such a way that your presence becomes a balm for the people around you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're whole. Wholeness doesn't mean the absence of struggle. It means the ability to hold both the joy and the pain with equal presence. That's the kind of presence that changes lives. That's the kind of presence that heals emptiness, not by filling it, but by honoring it, by recognizing it as sacred space, as the womb of transformation, the place where your deepest truths are born. And when you begin to live from that place, everything changes. You start to find joy in simple things again. A quiet morning, a real conversation, a moment of silence that doesn't feel awkward, but alive. You start to value depth over speed, truth over optics, connection over attention. And strangely, you begin to feel full, not because your life is perfect, but because you're no longer hiding from it. You realize that what you were truly starving for wasn't success or stimulation, it was authenticity. You were starving for the freedom to be fully yourself, without the mask, without the script, without the pressure to always be on. And once you taste that freedom, you'll never trade it again. So where do you go from here? You start small. You begin by noticing when you're performing, when you're chasing approval, when you're escaping yourself. And in those moments, you pause, you breathe. You ask, what am I truly needing right now? Not what would look good, not what would get likes, what would feel real. You reclaim your time. You protect your energy. You stop trying to be everything to everyone. And instead, you become deeply, unapologetically yourself. Even if that self is quiet, even if that self is still figuring it out, even if that self doesn't have all the answers. Because here's the final truth, you were never meant to have all the answers. You were meant to live the questions, to let life unfold, to trust that even when it feels like nothing's working, something deeper is awakening inside you. A kind of wisdom that can't be taught, only remembered. And maybe that's the real reason you feel empty. Not because something's wrong with you, but because you've been separated from your soul for too long. Now, it's calling you back. The question is, will you answer?